The vessel hung against the stars like a fragment of shadow, its surface reflecting almost nothing of the faint starlight that touched it. To the alien fleet, it was simply an anomaly, an object too still, too quiet, too deliberate to be natural. On the command deck of the reconnaissance cruiser, officers leaned over their instruments, feeding the anomaly into their cataloging protocols. To them, every unidentified construct in this sector was just another data point, another curiosity to be dissected, archived, and dismissed. The commander, a seasoned officer who had charted dozens of lifeless systems, studied the readings with detached interest. The vessel was massive, larger than any frigate or freighter the fleet had recorded in this quadrant, but it bore no transponders, no identifying codes, no broadcasts. Its silence seemed to invite them, as though it dared to be understood. He gave the order to scan. Energy lanced outward, invisible fingers brushing over the vessel's hull. The scanners returned data almost immediately, alloy compositions unfamiliar, shielding so dense it seemed to choke the probe beams. The officers frowned, puzzled at the irregularities. No architecture matched their databases. No culture in their star maps left signatures like these. The commander felt the first twinge of unease. Not fear, not yet, simply an irritation at the machine's sluggishness, as though the ship resisted being known. He dismissed the thought. All technology yielded eventually. The order was repeated to deepen the scan, to tear through whatever obstructions veiled the mystery. The lights across the command deck dimmed for a fraction of a second as the scan's intensity rose. A pulse came back through the channels, stronger than expected, thick with distortions. At first, the crew assumed it was interference, a meaningless cascade of corrupted noise. They adjusted filters, recalibrated sensors. But the sound persisted, coalescing into something structured. It began as a vibration in the walls, a low tremor that made claws twitch and mandibles click. Officers shifted uncomfortably at their posts. Then it rose, as though drawn upward from the depths of the void itself, resolving into something unmistakably alive. A scream. Not mechanical, not synthesized, but a voice filled with a fury and despair so raw that it pierced through every layer of translation software and audio dampeners. The commander froze as it tore through the bridge, a cry that held no words, only the essence of agony stretched into violence. The crew clutched at their headsets, tearing them away, but the sound wasn't only in the equipment. It was in the air, in their bones, reverberating through the very structure of the ship. The commander's hands tightened on the edge of the console. The scream carried images no sensor could render, searing flashes of firestorms, collapsing structures, the thunder of detonations ripping worlds apart. There was grief in it, but not surrender. Rage burned at its core, a defiance that made the most disciplined officer want to recoil. "Terminate the scan!" Someone hissed, their voice brittle. Orders were relayed with desperate urgency, but systems lagged as though the alien vessel resisted disconnection. The scream crescendoed, an unbroken torrent that seemed endless. The bridge lights flickered, monitors distorted, and for an instant the shadows on the hull outside looked like twisted faces, caught in the moment between death and vengeance. The commander forced himself to stare at the tactical display. The unknown ship had not moved, not altered position, not fired. It simply endured, silent yet screaming, as though the sound was not a transmission but a memory forced into the minds of intruders. His throat tightened. This was no random derelict. This was something built with intent. The crew worked frantically, hands darting over controls, but each attempt to sever the link failed. The feedback loop grew stronger, the scream embedding itself into their systems. It was becoming part of the ship itself. The commander barked in order to cut power to the scanners entirely, to sever cables if necessary. Sparks erupted from one console as the technician obeyed, the smell of burnt circuits filling the air. Gradually, mercifully, the sound weakened. It did not stop, not completely. Echoes lingered in the corners of the mind, impossible to dismiss, but the deck regained its quiet hum. Officers gasped, claws trembling, eyes bloodshot from the pressure. Some had collapsed against their chairs, ears bleeding faintly. The commander stood rigid, his composure a mask stretched thin. He turned to the viewport where the alien vessel drifted, dark and silent as before. Nothing had changed in its posture, yet everything had changed in their perception. It was no longer an anomaly. It was a threat wrapped in silence, daring them to repeat their mistake. No one spoke. No one needed to. Every soul aboard felt it. They had awakened something that had been waiting to be disturbed. And though the scream had faded into whispers, the echo clung to them, promising that the silence was not safety but a prelude. The silence did not last. Even as the crew tried to steady their breathing and wipe the blood from their ears, the sound returned, thin at first, like a whisper in an empty hall. The commander's claws twitched as it slid back into the air, rising steadily until it filled the bridge once more. This time it carried sharper edges, layers interwoven into the cry. It was no longer only one voice. The scream fractured into overlapping tones: fury, despair, command, defiance. The alien officers felt the weight of countless throats tearing against the void, all speaking through that single channel they had opened. The ship's systems strained against the intrusion. Displays broke into static, runes scrambling, alerts flashing without pattern. It was as though the sound itself had become code, rewriting the machinery in patterns beyond comprehension. Every speaker, every coil, every filament carried the resonance. No filter dampened it, no command silenced it. Even when technicians pulled power from subsystems, the vibration continued, bypassing electronics as though it had never needed them at all. On the deck, discipline unraveled. A navigator pressed his hands against his mandibles until they cracked, desperate to mute what he heard. Another clawed at the floor, leaving gouges in the metal as he convulsed. Those closest to the audio relays bled openly, dark fluid pooling at their feet. The commander shouted for restraint, but his own voice sounded fragile against the storm pouring through the ship. The scream carried visions, jagged fragments forced into unwilling minds. A battlefield lit by flames. Cities swallowed by nuclear fire. Soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder, teeth bared, fighting with broken weapons because surrender was not a word they knew. The aliens had never seen such defiance. Wars in their history had ended in retreat or negotiation, never with this raw insistence to endure, even in annihilation. One officer collapsed, eyes wide and unfocused, whispering words no one could translate. Another jammed a tool into an auxiliary console, shorting circuits in a desperate attempt to sever the feedback. Sparks flew, alarms blared, but the sound only grew more precise, as if fed by their resistance. The commander felt it not just in his ears but in his chest, vibrating against bone, resonating with his heartbeat until he no longer knew if the rhythm was his own or something imposed. Then came the realization: this was not communication. It was not a broadcast meant to be understood. It was a warning encoded in suffering, a memory sharpened into a weapon. The scream was not a single commander's last cry. It was the condensed echo of every battle the humans had ever fought, every life ended in fire, every commander who had chosen to burn rather than yield. The ship's systems flickered. For a moment, the tactical displays resolved into coherence, not with alien symbols but with human images. Faces contorted in rage. Ships burning in atmosphere. A lone figure standing on a shattered bridge, mouth open wide, pouring every ounce of strength into one final cry. The crew recoiled, covering their eyes, but closing them offered no escape. The vision pressed against their thoughts, searing itself into memory. The commander forced himself to the calm station, gripping it with trembling claws. He barked orders to shut down all active scans, to burn out every transmitter if necessary. The engineers obeyed, severing circuits, sacrificing systems piece by piece. Slowly, agonizingly, the link weakened. The scream diminished into static, the voices scattering into broken fragments. Yet even when the last channel went dead, silence did not feel like release. It felt like anticipation. The crew remained hunched over their posts, chests heaving, eyes glassy. No one spoke. No one dared. The commander lifted his gaze to the viewport where the warship loomed. It had not moved. It did not fire. It did not need to. Its message had been delivered. The screen would never leave them. Every officer knew what had happened would spread through the fleet, through the Empire. The recording could not be contained. It had entered their systems, copied itself into black boxes, embedded into every sensor array. Long after this moment, it would play again, across different ships, in different places, reminding all who heard it that the humans had forged something that carried their defiance forward, long past their deaths. The commander's throat was raw, though he had not screamed. He knew instinctively what the truth was. They had not scanned a derelict. They had trespassed into the memory of a species that had turned its very agony into a weapon. And now that memory had found them, it would not be forgotten. The warship stirred. Not with the suddenness of activation, but with the inevitability of something vast and ancient shifting its weight. The alien fleet's instruments screamed with warnings as dormant systems flared to life, one after another, like embers reigniting in a bed of ash. Energy readings spiked far beyond safe thresholds, climbing into ranges their computers flagged as impossible. The commander watched in silence as numbers rolled upward until the displays themselves shut down, unable to process what they were measuring. On the hull, faint patterns emerged. Not painted symbols or functional markings, but scars etched deep into the metal, lines that glowed faintly as power surged through conduits long cold. To the alien eyes, they looked less like engineering and more like ritual, memorial carvings inscribed with rage and grief. Some lines bent into arcs reminiscent of weapons fire, others jagged as though mimicking shattered ground. Each scar pulsed in time with the deep thrum echoing through the void. The vessel shifted its orientation. It did not rush. It did not lurch. It simply turned with deliberate control, aligning itself toward the reconnaissance fleet with the precision of a predator focusing on prey. Hull plates cracked open, revealing cannons that should not have existed at this scale, their dimensions dwarfing the cruisers arrayed before it. Energy condensed in their cores, faint distortions rippling across the fabric of space around them. The scream had not ended. It had changed. What once was singular anguish now layered into a chorus, countless voices overlapping into a tapestry of war. The fleet's communication channels flooded with overlapping transmissions, static woven with shouts and dozens of human tongues. Children wailing beneath bombardment. Soldiers chanting as they charged hopeless defenses. Commanders barking orders into firestorms. Each strand braided into a sound that was not just heard, but felt, as though the ship projected the memory of survival itself into every receiver. Some officers tried to analyze it, desperate to frame it as a psychological weapon, a deliberate intimidation tactic. But the commander knew better. This was not crafted for them. It was not designed to manipulate or deceive. It was the vessel's truth, its very nature made audible. They had forced their way into a machine built to carry humanity's scars forward, and now those scars stared back. Data banks finally stabilized enough to label what they faced. The translation came through broken, hesitant, as though the machines themselves resisted naming it. Relic-class dreadnought. Constructed in an era of total war, designed with one directive, to ensure humanity's rage, grief, and defiance could never be erased. They had not encountered a derelict. They had awakened a monument. Weapons aboard the relic shifted into alignment. Targeting systems locked onto the alien fleet with such confidence that their own ships might as well have been unshielded debris. No strategy presented itself. The commander's mind ran through every tactic: retreat, scatter, cloak, negotiate. None of them mattered. The dreadnought's movements carried the inevitability of history itself. As power built within its core, the atmosphere across the alien command deck thickened. The scream resonated with their own systems, amplifying until it seemed as though the dreadnought's fury vibrated inside their lungs. Officers clutched consoles to steady themselves, eyes wide, mandibles locked. The commander could feel it in his chest, a pressure that made breathing shallow, a presence that was not simply a ship but a judgment. In that moment, they understood why humans built it. Fragile as flesh, short-lived as sparks, they had created something that would outlast them, something that ensured no enemy would ever forget what it meant to provoke them. The dreadnought was not merely a machine of war. It was a vessel of memory, an archive of every battle where surrender was refused. Its scream was not a sound, but a reminder. Humanity's rage was infinite, and its echo traveled forever. The dreadnought completed its turn, its cannons aimed, its scars burning with power. The scream swelled until it eclipsed every other sound, the voices of the dead carried forward through steel and fire. The commander stared into the abyss of that vessel, and for the first time in his long career, he understood fear not as an instinct, but as a certainty. The fleet reacted with instinct, engines igniting as captains scrambled to widen the distance. Orders echoed through comm channels, each commander issuing conflicting instructions. Some demanded retreat, others called for formation, a few insisted on holding ground. The dreadnought did not rush. It loomed in silence, its weapons aligned, its scream echoing like the pulse of an ancient storm. The alien ships twisted through space, but the atmosphere of inevitability weighed heavier than gravity itself. The first strike came without warning. A column of light carved across the void, brighter than any sun, piercing through the shields of the nearest cruiser, as though they were paper. The vessel split in two, molten fragments scattering across the dark, each piece still trembling with residual energy before disintegrating. The surviving crews froze, their discipline collapsing as panic tore through their ranks. The dreadnought fired again, slower than modern weapons yet impossibly precise. Every blast felt deliberate, as though it chose its victims with care, studying each ship before unmaking it. Another cruiser vanished in silence, swallowed by an implosion that left nothing behind but distorted light. The scream rose with each strike, not from speakers but from within their minds, a chorus growing louder as the relic consumed them. Attempts to return fire began in desperation. Energy lances flared outward, missiles streaked across the void, kinetic rounds rattled through space. Every shot struck true, but the relic absorbed them without notice. Its hull shimmered with distortions, bending reality around its frame, rendering their weapons meaningless. Each impact was answered with silence, a silence worse than retaliation. The dreadnought was not resisting. It was enduring, its scars proof that it had withstood worse. The commander shouted for retreat, his voice breaking as he forced the order through trembling mandibles. Engines roared, ships scattered, formations disintegrated into chaos. But the dreadnought followed, not with speed, but inevitability. It did not need to chase. Its weapons reached across the void, each discharge claiming another vessel. Escape routes collapsed as wreckage clogged flight paths, as ships collided in panic, as fear turned coordination into ruin. On the bridge, the crew screamed as one of their sister ships disintegrated on the viewport's edge, fragments spinning toward them. The commander steadied himself, gripping the console hard enough to crack the surface, forcing his focus on survival. He issued commands to cut engines at the last second, letting debris slide past them. His hands shook. His chest burned with the weight of the scream. Yet he held firm, even as his officers broke around him. The dreadnought's chorus deepened. It was no longer anguish alone but triumph, layered with the memory of victories carved from hopeless odds. The aliens realized with dawning horror that the scream was not only about death. It was about victory at any cost. The dreadnought carried the certainty that humans had won before, against odds as impossible as this moment. Every sound declared that they would win again, through steel, through fire, through their very refusal to end. Distress signals scattered outward from the fleet, desperate calls for aid hurled into the void. But even as they transmitted, officers knew no reinforcement could arrive in time. The dreadnought was not a battle to survive. It was a sentence. The commander's thoughts turned not to victory but to memory. How long would this moment echo beyond them? Would the scream be carried back through their black boxes, through the survivors who might flee? Would their people learn what they had awoken before it consumed them all? The next blast tore through their formation, reducing another capital ship to vapor. The scream crescendoed, now deafening, so strong it rattled bolts in the hull. The commander's chest felt hollow, his throat raw though he had not cried out. He saw terror on every face, but beneath it, he saw resignation. They all understood. This was not combat. This was punishment. The dreadnought's weapons glowed again, swelling with the energy of another strike. The commander braced for impact, his claws tightening against the console, knowing resistance had no meaning. The relic-class warship, built from humanity's pain, was not content to repel them. It was teaching them. Every death, every scream in their fleet was a message carved into the stars. Intruding upon human memory was a mistake paid in blood and silence. When the next ship vanished, the commander closed his eyes, not from fear but from understanding. The dreadnought would not stop until its judgment was absolute. Silence spread through the wreckage, broken only by the static of failing comm channels. The dreadnought no longer fired, its weapons dimming as though satisfied with the ruin it had wrought. Fragments of once proud vessels drifted in slow arcs, molten edges cooling as they tumbled into the endless dark. Survivors floated in crippled ships, engines sputtering, shields collapsed, their hulls scarred by the unrelenting barrage. None dared speak at first. The screams still lingered inside them, echoing in memory even after it had ceased in sound. When words finally came, they were not commands but whispers. Officers spoke of retreat, not as an order but as a prayer. Every surviving ship limped away at minimal thrust, desperate to widen the distance without provoking another response. They avoided looking directly at the relic. Yet their eyes returned again and again, pulled by fear. It loomed against the stars, motionless, watching. The scars across its hull glowed faintly, as though recording the slaughter it had just carried out. One crew attempted to transmit a warning, broadcasting system-wide that no vessel should approach human warcraft. The commander listened as the message bled across the channels, halting words, distorted by damaged relays, yet unmistakable in tone. They described the scream, the visions, the annihilation that followed. They begged whoever heard them to remember. For every ship destroyed, the memory was spreading faster, encoded in data cores, etched into survivors' minds. Back on damaged bridges, silence hardened into dread. The scream had become more than a weapon, it had become a curse. No survivor doubted it would surface again, repeated by every ship that tried to analyze the corrupted data. It would replay itself in their archives, slip into their communications, haunt their training drills. The humans had ensured their rage would never die by carving it into steel. Every captain present understood that even if the dreadnought returned to stillness, the recording would live, infecting generations who would never dare challenge its creators. The commander's body shook with exhaustion. His claws were raw, his throat scorched, but his mind clung to clarity. He realized they had not been attacked out of defense alone. The humans had left this relic not merely to fight, but to teach. To remind anyone who looked too closely what had forged them. Fragile in flesh, finite in years, they had built something eternal. They had condensed survival, war, and defiance into a vessel that could speak long after their voices were gone. Whispers spread among the crew, stories already forming. Some said the scream carried the souls of the human dead, bound to their ship for eternity. Others claimed the dreadnought itself was alive, a machine with a will inherited from those who built it. Whether myth or truth mattered little. The relic's presence alone was enough to reshape policy, strategy, even faith. No empire would hear the recording and approach a human vessel without trembling. The fleet drifted farther, but no distance felt safe. Every officer knew the dreadnought could follow if it chose. Yet it did not. It returned to stillness, its scars cooling until it became again what it had been at first, a silent shadow against the stars. The lesson was finished. The scream faded into the minds of those who survived, becoming their burden to carry home. The commander watched as his ship limped away, systems flickering, alarms still howling in the background. He wondered how many of his words would even reach their people, how much of the truth would survive the retellings. But he knew one certainty: the scream would endure where he could not. The recording embedded itself into every black box, every corrupted relay, every fragment of their broken fleet. It was unstoppable. Across the galaxy, when those records were replayed, when the scream erupted again from foreign speakers, fear would spread faster than fire. Fleets would refuse orders. Colonists would evacuate border worlds. Politicians would sign treaties before risking another confrontation. Humanity had built no simple weapon. They had built memory as armament, terror as deterrent. Their ships carried their voice into eternity, louder than any living tongue. The commander bowed his head, claws trembling. He knew history would mark this encounter not as a battle, but as a revelation. The humans had declared themselves not with ambassadors, not with negotiations, but with a scream that outlived them. And across every empire, in every archive, in every whisper shared by frightened crews, one truth would remain: scanning a human warship was not curiosity. It was doom.